Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so sorry it's been ages since I last uploaded a video. I've had the most hectic 2 weeks. I've just started a new job and it was also my best friend's wedding yesterday. So I've been a little preoccupied recently, but it's okay, I'm back and I'm ready to discuss the next 2 chapters of Chain of Gold. As always, a small disclaimer, this isn't a book review, it's more a close reading, close analysis, focusing on any of the references to the other Shadowhunter Chronicles in these chapters, as well as any smaller details I think could be important for the next 2 books in the Last Hours trilogy. So, let's begin! So chapter 15 begins with Lucy, Thomas and Christopher spying on the Enclave from above. And the way that they are able to spy on them is by Lucy drawing a rune on the floor that makes the floor transparent so they can hear and see the meeting below. Not only is this major Harry Potter vibes, when Fred and George use those huge ears and they drop them down to try and hear what the Order are discussing below, but it also reminds me of a scene in Clockwork Princess. So if you remember in Clockwork Princess, Gideon accidentally proposes to Sophie and everyone in the room just freaks out. And it's actually Cecily that says everyone needs to leave because these two need a moment alone. But of course, Cecily is the best and her and Gabriel end up spying on Gideon and Sophie inside, using a rune and holding hands so they can both hear the audio. So in this chapter, Lucy mentions how it was actually her father Will who taught her how to draw this particular rune. And I can't help thinking that it was Cecily that taught Will how to do this in the first place. I won't cover much about the meeting, so I don't think there's any particular references that are important, but there is a really funny bit I do want to mention. So Chain of Gold came out in March this year, which for me in the UK was the start of the coronavirus lockdown. I actually read Chain of Gold during the lockdown. So when the Enclave speak about shutting off London and having a quarantine, I shat myself. It felt way too close to home and way too like Cassie just predicted the future. Literally, as soon as Will mutters, it's a quarantine Martin, I was just like, same, absolutely same. Last thing I want to focus on in the meeting is the fact that the Enclave are still a piece of trash. Even with Will and Tessa there, they are still not acting fast enough in these situations. So Thomas, who has just sadly lost Barbara, is sick of this. He says they should take matters into their own hands. Quoting, "As soon as we have hold of the Pikesis, we will handle this ourselves, for if we wait for the Enclave to come to a consensus, I expect more will die." Not only is this classic Enclave behaviour, but who remembers in Clockwork Princess when Tessa gets abducted by automatons and Will begs the Enclave that they go after them with all their supplies, and the Enclave just don't believe him. So Will says, "Do you know what, I will go myself." He takes his horse and he rides into the Welsh countryside after Tessa. So back to the Hell Rule, and Cordelia is just about to perform that dance. So as she's getting on stage, James and Matthew are applauding her, encouraging her, and Cassie mentions a dark-haired vampire girl with bright combs in her hair who joined in the applause. Obviously this is none other than Lily Chen, who we know more than 100 years later tells Alec in The Land I Lost from Ghost of the Shadow Market that she doesn't really like shadow hunters. The only ones that she likes are Alec and this girl she met, Cordelia Carstairs. So we know Lily was working as a waitress in the Hell Rule at this period of her life. I want to know more. How close is Lily to Cordelia? Do they become close in the next 2 books, or is it more of Lily just admiring Cordelia for her bravery? I really hope that Lily ends up helping Cordelia or vice versa in the next 2 books, because I'd love to see what this friendship has in store for us. Okay, it's time to talk about that performance. This performance added 10 years to my lifespan and cleared my skin. The whole time my jaw was on the floor. If Cordelia isn't one of your favourite characters, then what is wrong with you? I'm sick of people saying that Cordelia is just James and Matthew's love interest when she goes and does something like this. She's so much more than her relationship to those boys. She is completely her own person, and I feel like this performance really shows that. First of all, she reaches up, unpins her hair, which then cascades down her back. Then she recites one of her favourite stories. When I reread this bit of the chapter, I was really shocked at how mature Cordelia seemed. Then I realised that she is 17 years old at this point. I think because I assumed that Lucy was 16, Cordelia was also 16, whereas in reality, she's the same age as James. I really like this because I feel like it makes James and Cordelia more equal together, and there's no big age difference between them, like how Alec was 18 in the Mortal Instruments and Clara was just 15. I know know those two didn't have a romantic relationship, but I still think the age difference between these two people was actually kind of weird if you think about it. When I was 18, I wasn't hanging around with any 15-year-olds. I also think that when a character is closer to your actual age as a reader, you can relate to them a lot more and understand their actions and why they act this way. I won't lie, I'm not 17. I do understand Cordelia's actions a lot more than I understood Clary's. So that's a nice little extra I just wanted to bring in. After the performance, Charles obviously appears to ruin the fun yet again, and James and Cordelia hide in the whispering room. So, before they start getting it on, I thought there was a nice little reference to some of the events in Clockwork Princess again. You notice that in the whispering room there's actually some fairy fruit, and James mentions how it has no effect on warlocks, no magical effect at least, but on humans, ... So James and Cordelia are obviously very, very intelligent because they put the fruit back. But do you remember who did ingest a fairy substance and ended up getting freaky? Will and Tessa. So at Benedict Lightwood's masquerade ball in Clockwork Prince, Will and Tessa end up drinking a drink that has fairy powers inside, and things get a bit hot and heavy on the balcony, to the point that the next day, Tessa thinks that it was just the fairy drink that made her act that way with Will. Obviously we know it's not. I'm so happy Tessa's offspring are more intelligent than she was that night. There's a really nice reference to the Herondale mark on James, which is the faint white scar above his collar in the shape of a star. Again, a result of when their parents got a bit hot and heavy in that infamous cave scene in Clockwork Princess. And a family mark we also know is passed down all the way to Jace. As they go to leave the Herald, they pick up Anna from Hypatia's bedchambers, and there's a really nice description about Anna's shirt, which was hung open to display a ruby necklace glimmering red as blood against her throat. Obviously this is the necklace that Cecily gifts to Anna in every Exquisite thing from Ghost of the Shadow Market, and it's also the one that in the present day is currently kept by Isabel Lightwood. I have to say, this necklace is probably one of my favourite family heirlooms in the whole of the Shadowhunter Chronicles. Back at the Institute, the gang then go to the Sanctuary to release the demon out of the Pyxis so it is empty to trap the other demon inside. After they end up killing the demon inside, we are introduced to a familiar face. It is none other than the Magnus Bane. So Cassie writes how someone had come in through the door to the street outside, a tall man, very tall, with a shock of black hair. His skin was brown, a shade darker than Cordelia's own, his eyes gold green and slit-pupilled like a cat's. When I tell you I screamed when Magnus appeared. He just saves the day all the time, he's the best character, and it really wouldn't be a Shadowhunter book without him. There's a nice mention of the fact that Henry and Magnus invented the infamous portals together, which I always forget hasn't always been a thing. I feel like in the Mortal Instruments they are always using portals to travel. They just seem like a really convenient way to get from A to B. But remember that pre the infernal devices, portals didn't exist. Two things to take away here. One, people that don't realise how much of a genius Henry Brownwell is need to stop. This guy invented travelling by portal. He is the best. Two, you know Henry would be so proud to see one of his descendants, Clary, be able to create a portal just with her stilo. Magnus mentions to James that Jem had actually contacted Magnus about some of the things that James was going through. This made me remember that in Chain of Iron, there's going to be an extra Jem and Magnus short scene. I feel like this friendship hasn't really been developed before, and I'm intrigued to see how these two will work together. Obviously, Jem isn't really Jem at this point. He is brother Zacharias, so it will be a bit different to if Magnus had met Jem as himself, but I'm really excited for a bit of #Jagnus. I always feel like Magnus is the biggest Wesser shipper, whereas Katarina is the biggest Jesser shipper. So it'll be nice to see the dynamic between Jem and Magnus in this story. The gang then go to trap the Manticore demon in the now empty Pyxis box, with Magnus helping them clear the bridge using his powers. It's all going okay until the demon literally yeets Cordelia into the Thames. Not really where you want to be. Lucy Herondale then does one of the most badass things ever. She makes a call to the dead. So out of the water appear all these ghosts, including a ghost prisoner that was holding Cordelia, her body limp, his bright hair soaked and streaming down over her shoulders. I've said it before and I will say it again. Lucy is the most underrated character in the whole fandom. This girl can literally control the dead, and you're telling me that James is seen as superior. Yeah, so what? Dude can travel through multiple dimensions. She called up the dead from the River Thames. I don't know what it will take for people to start respecting Lucy Herondale, but it starts now. After chapter 16 ends, there's a brief flashback to 1900, particularly in Sirenworth Hall, where the Carstairs family were currently residing at the time. I think this short chapter is one of my favourite flashbacks in the whole of Chain of Gold because it's a story of how Cordelia obtained Cortana. So Alistair and Cordelia are fighting about who should get this family sword, and Alistair's reasoning is that when Cordelia gets married and has a passel of brats, one of them will end up with Cortana and they won't be a Carstairs. I'm 99% sure that James and Cordelia are endgame, which then makes her a Herondale. So my current favourite fan theory is that Cortana does pass down Alistair's lineage, ending up at Emma Carstairs in the present day. We all know that Sona is pregnant again at this point, and if I can get my way, it will be that Alistair and Thomas raise this child as their own. I don't know what's going to happen to Sona. I've got a really sneaky feeling that she could be the next to die in this series. So if Alistair does end up raising his little sibling as his own, I think that they could get Cortana, which will then be passed down to present day Emma. Speaking of Emma, there's also a great parallel to Queen of Air and Darkness in this chapter. Alistair seems to think his reasoning is good enough, so snatches Cortana from Cordelia, only for the sword to end up wrenching itself out of Alistair's grasp and flying across the room towards his sister. I was reminded of the bit in Queen of Air and Darkness when Zara actually confiscates Cortana from Emma under the justification that Emma used it to break the mortal sword. And there's that really nice bit on the battlefield when Cortana flies out of Zara's grasp and straight into Emma's hands once more. The last thing I want to talk about today is the possible fan theory about just what is going to happen with Cortana and Cordelia. So in the blurb of Chain of Iron, which has actually already been pre-released, there's a mention of Cortana actually burning Cordelia's hand. Not only is this very, very distressing, but we really should have seen it coming, especially when Cassie is commissioning this piece of art, which, if you look closely, Cortana is actually burning Cordelia's hand in. There's this really ominous line by Elias in this chapter when he says, "Cordelia, a blade of Wayland the Smith is a great gift, but it is also a great responsibility, one that may one day cause you sorrow." Elias, can we not? I am not ready for Cortana to burn Cordelia. I do have a theory of why Cortana ends up burning Cordelia in Chain of Iron. It relates to some of the chapters that are actually coming up in Chain of Gold, so I'll definitely make sure to revisit this topic later. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I really hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and remember to subscribe. I've also really been loving the amount of comments I've been getting lately with everyone's own interpretations of these references and other fan theories. Please do comment them below. I would love to discuss just some of the crazy things that could be happening in the rest of the Last Hours trilogy with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.